Good morning from my side. I hope everybody is awake at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I know that we are starting with a subject which is not very easy to participate maybe, but I'm trying to make it easy for you and hope to give you some good time here within the next minutes. My goal is it to make you excited about accessibility, and this is what I'm trying to do in my job every day. And my goal is in my job and also here that you really understand why accessibility is a cool thing and why it's not just a thing you need to do in order to serve some people's wishes. And in this presentation, I'm trying to look at different aspects. We decided to not have a content slide where you see all what's coming, so stay excited. At least I know what's happening, but who knows? The first point we're talking about are PDFs inherently inaccessible. And this is a very key point because what we see is that there are many arguments against PDFs, and a few things we put on this slide. And we are just looked up some common concerns when we just researched for this presentation. And one concern is that PDF accessibility is so much trouble. And this is coming from University of Illinois. They say that PDFs are not a good job. They're just very hard to do. Gov.uk says content should be published in HTML and not PDF because HTML accessibility is much more easier. Others say we hate PDFs. And you see there are lots of concerns from people who need accessibility out there with PDFs. And I promise you we will get some good points where we need PDFs and where PDFs are a great job. I would just wanted to start with the points where people have concerns in order to maybe help you understand why this is the case. And to understand this a little bit better, on the next slide, we're just talking about assistive technology and PDFs, and I just wanted to tell you what the difference is with assistive technologies like screen readers or screen magnification. One big difference is that assistive technology cannot access the content of a document, of a PDF document directly. So only the text structure gives the content and also defines the content order. So this is why it's so important. And we see that most PDFs are somehow inaccessible. We found that only 4.35% of all PDFs we tested for our report for the European Union, according to the Web Accessible Directive, have passed the PAC test. So they just are compliant to the whole PDF UA standard. So that's not much. It doesn't mean that all the other PDFs are inaccessible, that it at least means that they have got some accessibility issues. And this is, I think, why many people are a little bit concerned when they're talking about PDFs. What is not in the slide here, but what is very important, is that also the PDF readers are not all supporting good PDFs. So if we're talking about smartphones, you've got different PDF readers coming with the operating system, but not all of them really support PDF structures. And so it's, for many people, sometimes a bit hard to read them. So next thing we're talking about is problem of untagged PDFs. As I said in the slide before, if a PDF isn't tagged, the assistive technology cannot access the document. So it's like you're trying to read a paper which is white. So if someone prints you a white page with where the font color is white, you can't read it. And I think it's the same if you have a PDF without any text structure. To give people some help and to avoid some issues, some PDF readers have the ability to auto-tag a PDF when you open it. For example, Accurate Reader does it, but I think also the Foxit Reader can do that. So what they do is they give you some accessibility options you can choose from, and then they're trying to analyze the document and come up with some text structure, and you can just play with the settings, and you may come up with some structure which is readable. It works for simple documents, so just plain text, maybe some headings. But as soon as you've got tables in that document, you will notice that auto-tagging from the reader's side is something which is not working currently. So this results then in often having documents where you can only read part of the structure. And if you, for example, have tables, then you just be very careful and remember a lot of things in order to understand what you read. This is why many users prefer Word documents, because the source for PDFs is often a Word document. And in Word documents or in all other documents than a PDF, assistive technology is able to access the content directly. So this is something which is special for PDFs. So what makes the difference in PDFs? It's the PDF UA standard. I think all of you heard about it, and Duff told me that you had a lot of accessibility stuff yesterday. But just for those who may just want it again, PDFs can outperform using the PDF UA standard because the visual counterparts can be a PDF can be displayed differently using the text structure than it is on the screen. So the big advantage, what we see in a lot of public sector bodies, is that you have got PDF documents which have a layout which is very old and very common for people, and they don't want to change it, but it's unusable when you're using a screen reader. And what you could do with PDFs is you can just use the text structure and define it differently. For example, if you have a layout table which is normally rendered as a normal table in a PDF document, you can just grab it and say, hey, I want to have it as a list. Because it's not a table from a content perspective, it's just a table from a layout perspective. So then, as a result, assistive technology can display the same information which is on the screen, which is optimized for a graphical perception in a different way, which is optimized for people using assistive technology or screen readers in particular. So a big advantage and a big plus for PDFs. What we also then see is, or what we always been asked, what's the root cause of documents or PDFs being inaccessible? And the problem maybe is more seeable in PDFs, because what people do very often is just have a printed page, put it on a scanner, convert it to PDF, and throw it in a folder or send it via email. So you have got a PDF which only has an image. Is this image accessible? No. Do you have screen readers who can work with it? Yes, using AI. Is it reliable? It depends. So, same problem. If the structure is nicely laid out, it can work. Will it work with tables? Sometimes. So I'm not saying I cannot read I'm not saying that I cannot read a PDF which only holds an image of a page or many pages, but I'm saying the result could be very different and not foreseeable for me. So scanning a PDF or scanning a page with a scanner, don't use text recognition or character recognition, and just then put it somewhere is a fast idea, but will not work for screen reader users. By the way, to see if a PDF file is just an image or has text, what you can do is you can press Ctrl-A, Ctrl-C, and then go to another text editor and press Ctrl-V. And if nothing happens, then it's just an image. If text is copy and pasted, then you know that this PDF has at least some text structure. So this means that accessibility should be implemented from start before exporting a document to PDF. And this is where we often see big issues. Many people, and I think this is the same for public and private sectors, have not really learned how to work with their text editors. Everybody would say, hey, I can do that. I can write a letter, I can write a text, I can write a document. But I think 2 or 3 years ago, I've been told that someone just had to do a master thesis, and the person just wrote out this document, and at the end, this person manually created the table of content. So this person was particularly not aware that if this person would have used headings, then there would be an automated way to create a table of content. And this was a young person in the university, and I think we are quite sure that this person is not able to use Word. And this is something which we see with young computer users and also maybe older computer users. So one of the big things we see is that people need to learn how to use text editors to be able to create accessible source documents. And another issue with accessible PDFs in particular is that there is currently no way to export accessible PDFs from standard software. I know that Word can export PDFs, and I can say that they are readable, but they are not just implementing every part of the PDF UA standard. So if we just check them, then we will find errors in the documents. And depending on how you structure the documents, these errors can have a negative impact for the readers. So currently, you are in the need to have any kind of add-ins or plugins in Word to have that document being exported respecting all accessibility standards. I know that there is work going on in LibreOffice to change that, but I know that they have got a long way to go, and I'm currently not aware about how far they have gone. I know that it works for simple documents, but for the complex documents, they also have a lot of issues in their documents. So everybody who wants to make sure that their document is accessible, they need to have some extra software, either implemented as an add-in or a plugin in Word, or maybe a standalone converting software, whatever. But from a technical point of view, it's currently not doable to export a complete accessible PDF using standard software. So hopefully this will change in the future. I know that we have different opinions about that. But all in all, I think it would be a good idea. So this were some technical things for start. Second part is, how does the law ensures that PDFs are accessible in Germany and in Europe? We may have some differences. as Dav said, I'm working for the German monitoring body for accessibility. So I know the German laws, but I'm not aware of any aspect which is in another European country. But I just wanted to give you some overview about how things are being managed in the EU and in Germany. So you all know, I think from the press releases in the past and maybe from many people who contact you and say, oh, I can make your PDFs accessible, no problem, easy, no cost, everything's cool. So you're aware of that. Also, the private sector is now forced to have PDFs accessible, at least some of them. And for the public sector, we have got the Web Accessibility Directive, which is implemented in Germany in dem Behindertengleichstellungsgesetz and Barrierefreie Informationstechnikverordnung. And we have got the European Accessibility Act, which in Germany is then the Barrierefreiheitsstärkungsgesetz and the Barrierefreiheitsstärkungsgesetzverordnung. So this is the legal framework which exists in Germany and also in Europe. So every European country has to implement the European Accessibility Act and the Web Accessibility Directive in their local laws. So there is no European country which can just leave that out or do something different. On the next slide, we'll just focus a little bit more on the BITV, which we have here in Germany. The BITV in this last version, where accessibility come in from the Web Accessibility Directive, is in force since 2019, so 7 years ago. 6 years, sorry, it's early in the morning. It applies to public sector bodies on the federal level and also on the other ones. So every public sector body in Germany, no matter where it is located, has to make sure that websites, mobile applications, and documents are accessible. And I think one difference in Germany, in contrast to the European Union, is that in Germany, PDFs have to be compliant to two standards. One is the EN 301549, which is the standard for accessibility, which is for documents, websites, mobile applications, and software in general. And the other one is the PDF UA standard, which is implemented here in Germany as a law. So documents have to follow both standards to be considered accessible. This is something where I'm not aware of that other European states have implemented it in this way, but we do. And I think everybody who knows what the UA standard can do and who will, I think, be on my side and say that's a good idea that it's been like this, because the main aspect of the UA standard is the text structure and how the text structure is implemented and how it should be implemented in PDFs. And this gives a really reliable presentation of a document where ideally each PDF viewer shows the document in the same way. And so I think it's a great thing that we have all that implemented here in Germany as a second standard for especially PDF accessibility. Other documents like Word, Excel, PowerPoint just only have to be accessible to the European standard, but PDFs in particular have the UA standard as a second standard which they have to be compliant to. So the next slide shows the facts for the European Accessibility Act, in short BFSG here in Germany. As said, it's in force since the 28th June or June 28th this year. It's consumer-facing products and services. That means B2C, not B2B. If that is a good idea from a law perspective or from a user perspective, I think we can discuss this for a long time. From a personal point of view, I would say it's not a good idea because many people with disabilities are working or should be able to work in companies should be able to work in the public sectors. And if only B2C products and services need to be accessible, then it may not necessarily help people with disabilities to work in either private or public sector. Because in those areas, products and services do not have to be accessible. I think there are some products where it doesn't matter. For example, if we're looking at smartphones, I think Apple or Google, for example, will not produce different smartphones for public and private sector. But what can be an issue is if you have got special products for the public sector, for example, smartphones with specific cryptographical interfaces or whatever, then those are not considered with the European Accessibility Act. And so it is possible that people with disabilities are not able to use those devices, although smartphones in general are considered as being accessible according with the European Accessibility Act. So in this current stage, only consumer-facing products. It applies, as I said, to private business and only those private business with more than 10 employees or a yearly revenue above 2 million euros. So this is the border or the threshold. If you are underneath that, then you may not use all the things which apply in this law. Which documents are in this European Accessibility Act? What we are very sure about is that it's being contracts and onboarding materials for contracts, and they also have to be PDF UA compliant and respect the EN 301459 standard. And there's particularly clause 10, which is for non-web documents. But we have got also many things where we're not sure. And one thing is invoices, and the other one is newspapers. And to tell you a quick story about it, and just to make sure how difficult this is, there are currently people out there who are saying it's very clear that the buying process, for example, of a newspaper or a newspaper article needs to be accessible because, for example, blind people like me should be able to buy a newspaper article. But the same people also say that the newspaper article is not an ebook. And so, because it's not an ebook, it may not fall under the accessibility law. Is it a good idea to do that? No. Because why should I buy something in an accessible way and then be not able to use it? I think makes no sense. The same thing is with invoices. For example, you're buying a product in an online shop and all the shopping experience is nice and everything is good. And then you get the invoice. Maybe you want to pay the invoice because it's not directly paid, or you just need it for other reasons. And then you see that you cannot read the invoice. Does that make sense? No. So what this makes sure is that we have got this and many more examples in the European Accessibility Act where people are not really 100% sure what needs to be accessible and how it needs to be accessible. Another thing is that in the European Accessibility Act also it's been talked about that you have to use simple language. I think this is a big deal for banks and insurance companies. But there is no clear definition what simple language means. So does simple language mean everybody needs to understand it? Or only some people with a certain degree of knowledge? Who knows? So all in all, the European Accessibility Act will hold some exciting things within it. And I think we all will see some interesting lawsuits in the next years, hopefully very soon, that everybody gets clear about how to use it and how to make things accessible and which things to make accessible. So after this very maybe not so good news thing, we're coming back to some very good news thing, and this thing is, how does we as BFIT-Bund ensure PDF accessibility? Who do we help people making things more accessible? So our role at BFIT-Bund, what do? We've got the task to monitor accessibility of federal websites and mobile applications, as I said before. We advise public bodies on digital accessibility. We report to the European Union with all the state monitoring bodies. And we have our ministry, the BMS, with some other data. And we recommend standards in best practice, how to use or how to implement accessibility and how to make sure that things are as accessible as they can be. So one thing here, or two things here are, I think, very important for us. One is that every time we send a report, an accessibility report to a public sector body, we always encourage them very seriously to contact us and say, hey, if you have any questions, make sure you contact us. We've sometimes been asked to hold workshops. Moira and I will be in October, and we will do an accessibility workshop, one day for documents and one day for HTML programming. So we do that from time to time, and maybe some people have noticed that we also have a LinkedIn page. I know it's German only, but I think some of you understand German. Maybe others could use automated translation. And we publish there some very interesting accessibility things from time to time. I think 1 or 2 per week. And so I just want to invite you to follow that page and make sure that you don't miss those things. I think they're very interesting. And I'm not saying that because I've written them, because I've written some of them, but not all of them. And many things are written by my colleagues, and they do a fantastic job to make sure that accessibility is a fun thing and not something which needs to be done. So for those who don't know how this monitoring works, we have got 2 monitoring types in the European Union. We have got the simple monitoring and the in-depth monitoring. And to focus on the document part of the monitoring, we in Germany decided that in the simple documents, we test one document with the PDF accessibility checker. This is more than the Web Accessibility Directive says, because the Web Accessibility Directive only tells us to monitor documents with the in-depth testing. But in-depth testing is round about 10%, maybe a little less, about from the overall monitoring sample we have. And so we in Germany said, and all federal states agreed, that if we would only do that in the in-depth testing, like the Web Accessibility Directive says, there are only a few documents. Also, in this 10%, we have got web pages, websites, and mobile applications. And what we find is that many mobile applications do not have documents related to them. So the amount of documents we would test if we follow this directive very closely would be very few. So we just decided to test PDF documents also in the simple test. As I said, with the PDF accessibility checker, I think everybody knows about this tool, and I think Markus also will present the newest version of PAC today and give some insights about what's coming. In the in-depth monitoring, we have to test 2 documents. So one document we test automatically with the PAC, and the other document we test manually. So we do all the manual checks from clause 10 from the European standard to make sure that we find lots of accessibility issues. Automated test versus manual checks, or automated checks versus manual checks. What we currently see is that lots of people being aware of that documents now need to be accessible. They say, hey, we need that, and how do we do that? And lots of companies coming up and say, hey, we can do automated tests and we can automatically repair and remediate your documents. So I say yes, maybe, but I could tell you at least very easily 2 things where it can't help. So currently, we have, for example, the quality of alt text, so alternative text for images, where you can't check if they are correct. You could check if this attribute is filled, but you could not check if this is correct. And for example, meaningful labeling of form fields is also something which you cannot check automatically. So you need manual testing. So manual testing remains essential to catch these accessibility issues. I think we all agree that AI and other automated mechanisms will help us in the future to check those things which are checkable, and they make things easier, and they will help us to focus on certain aspects. But we also know that we will have the ability, or we have to make sure that manual testing is done in the future. So some common is accessibility or PDF issues we find in our testing. Identify input purpose is something we see very often. Error identification. So if I know this is very hard, and this is why we sometimes tend to say maybe you should do a PDF form as HTML, not PDF, because it's much more easier to implement. And inferent relationship. But this is something we see also in lots of non-form PDFs, so in just standard documents where we see that this criteria is often missed. And as I said, non-text content, so alternative text, is something where people just missed to create alt text for the images, or otherwise decide that these images are being decorative. And page titles. So this is also often missed. So what are the key takeaways from my side, which I want to give you? I hope all of you are very excited about accessibility, and I think all of you hopefully see that accessibility is not something which is only for a few people. I think if you look at that from a technical point of view, you will often see that accessibility also goes hand in hand with usability. And this also applies for documents. So if something is accessible, then you can say it's also very good usable. But how to make sure that accessibility gets better? So we all have to make sure that PDFs comply to the PDF UA standard. We also have to be aware that many documents are being inaccessible due to authoring mistakes. Alt texts relationship in documents, perhaps. What we also see is that headings not being used. Instead, they use just bold text or underlined text. So, as I said earlier, we have to make sure that people know how the documents can be created, or the source documents can be created without any accessibility issues. We have to be aware that accessible documents are legally mandated. So, as we said, the European Accessibility Act and the Web Accessibility Directive say those documents have to be accessible, and you have to do that. And how can we then create more accessible documents? Invest in author training, so make sure that all the authors know what they do, how they can do that. We have to make sure that we have comprehensive testing, combined automated testing and manual testing. We have to make sure that authors get notice about accessibility issues as soon as they create the document. As currently Microsoft Word has implemented it in its current stage, Word is telling you directly when you create a document about accessibility issues. Can Word find all of them? No, but it can find a few of them. And maybe in the future using AI technology or other things, it may be able to find more. And also what I said earlier, we have to make sure that the export of documents is being improved. So we have to make sure that it's easier for people to export accessible documents. And I think many of you are working in ISO standards here or working for big companies which create PDF tools. And I hope you can make lives for people easier in order to help them to easily create more accessible documents. So I hope all this made sure that I really love PDFs. I like them. They're a great document format. They have got some challenges regarding or compared to other documents, but they've got also some huge benefits. They work on each platform. The formatting is always the same. So there are lots of pluses for PDFs, but we have to make sure they're being made accessible. And I hope that you all here in this room will just go out there and tell people how great it is to have accessible documents. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. And I hope you will all have a great opportunity here to talk to others. And I wish all of us a nice day here and many good presentations. Thank you.